Guys, nice to see you. This is Gabi with Breaking Bio, the YouTube channel that promotes and celebrates diversity in the sciences. I'm a conservation biologist, and my hair is doing a little sticky up David Tennant thing right now. Sorry about that. But I'm here to chat with you on this kind of gloomy November evening about identity. So, identity is something that I've talked a little bit about on the channel before in these one shots. I've talked about gender identity, so I want to chat a little bit with you guys more about something different, which is ethnic identity, especially speaking as someone who is, um, you know, I'm happy to admit or self-identify as I seem ethnically ambiguous. So how that's impacted my viewpoint of myself as a multi-ethnic person, and how that's kind of shaped, my worldview and how I see the world, as I learn more about all the different places that my family, have come from. So, yeah, and I think this is particularly important in American context, as it's a very unique situation here in the States that isn't necessarily shared in other places in the world. So I'm going to chat a little bit about that. So yeah, so my mom is Prussian and Irish on her side, and my dad is, we think, Angolan, but Afro Brazilian, and then Native Brazilian, Indigenous Brazilian, and Portuguese. There's a lot in there, so I'm not really one thing. I'm a mix of many things, and I think that's true of a lot of people as well. So, just kind of discussing kind of what that means when you're from a lot of different places and how that affects how I see the world. So I'm going to be speaking about this mostly kind of within using myself as an example, as I can really only speak to my own experience. And it's always really interesting, looking at things kind of both in a context outside the States and then a context within the States. Because although, for example, like I have African ancestry, I don't really fully identify with a lot of the struggles that people from that group have gone through in the States because completely different cultural contexts, for obvious reasons. So, or although I have, native ancestry, it's native Brazilian ancestry, which is, different, obviously, than Native American ancestry, which, is depending on what tribe you're from, is also very different. So not trying to like extrapolate my own backgrounds to other backgrounds that don't apply to me. So within going into that, in terms of how I think race or ethnicity is dealt in the States is very unique here. Just going off my observations, there seems to be more of a sense of like stratification, where people here kind of tend to adhere closely to one group, I think, a lot. For example, if you have African ancestry, a lot of people will identify as Black, even if they have other ancestry. Or, or if you have Spanish speaking parents, you might identify as Hispanic. But in Brazil, where my dad's from, it's actually really interesting because I was chatting with him about this, and I'm just like, so, I'm a non-white person, of many different ancestries, and so are you. But what do you identify as? Like we're both multi-ethnic, but like, what do you identify as? And he was just like, I was just like, do you identify as like Black? Do you identify as like Native? Do you identify as what is it? And he was really interesting because he said, I don't really fully identify with any of those. I'm just me. I identify as myself, which is made up of a lot of different ethnicities. And speaking of him, he said Brazilians oftentimes, that is what it is. Like Brazilians, extremely multicultural, extremely multi-ethnic. So it's not that there isn't prejudices in Brazil. There are, but it's a little bit less stratified out by group. So a lot of Brazilians, identify as multi-ethnic rather than Black, white, or anything, similar to that. So that was a really interesting kind of cultural difference that I saw. which is why, I'm really fascinated by things like ethnic identity and how that works, um, especially in the States, because, like I said, like I I'm kind of looking at it from a different cultural context as well. So another thing that I was thinking about was just like, so the first time I ever kind of experienced discussions about race, I was actually really little, and it was completely innocuous, and I was maybe 3 or 4 years old, and hanging out on the playground playing with this little African American girl, and we had a great time, running around the playground, and I pointed out my mom, um, and my mom's white, and she literally she like looked at me and looked at my mom, and she just goes, "Why is your mom white?" And I remember just kind of going, "I don't know," "I don't know," it's just it is what it is, and that kind of being like the first time I realized that racial differences were really a thing. um, yeah, so that was also really interesting. And in terms of other cultural contexts, so when I moved to South Africa for grad school, um, when I didn't open my mouth a lot of the time, I think people assumed that I was part of a group that was called colored people, which is not in South Africa a derogatory term. It's the term that they prefer for someone who's multiracial. So they kind of, because it's so diverse there as well, especially in big cities, I was just kind of assumed to be part of that group. Obviously, until I opened my mouth and they heard my accent. So I think, so I didn't really feel quite as not fitting in. So, but it was really interesting because when I was there in 2015 and 2016, there was a lot of unrest and student protests and things, and because of how recent um, a lot of South African history is, since 1994, there's still a lot of um, tension, I think, racial tension that exists, which is understandable. But it was really interesting because, like I was a foreigner, right? Like I'm not from South Africa, um, you know, but and also I just you know wasn't white or black, you know, like not fully white, not fully black, a lot of things, right? So I felt like I didn't really have any kind of say in that fight. I just kind of stayed out of it. It was really fascinating to kind of get a sense of how other countries view things like race, um, and also completely different. So like when I moved to Kenya to do some work, um, there it's less about tensions between black and white like it is in South Africa. It's Kenya's more about the differences between tribes. So there's 42 tribes in Kenya, and they're all extremely distinct with their own, cultural norms and everything like that. And because they're very distinct, that sometimes leads to tension as well. But it's different, you know what I mean? So figuring out how I fit in there was kind of interesting as well because again, I wasn't from Kenya, and when I was working with the rangers at the conservation NGO I was working with, at first they were calling me Mzungu, which is Swahili for like like a white person, not like derogatory, but just a white person. Until one of the guys was just like, yeah, but like they're not like completely a white person, but there wasn't really a term for like not completely a white person. So and I was not a black person or a white person, so they were like not really sure what to call me, so they ended up calling me like Mahindi, which I think means like Indian, like from India, which is like completely inaccurate because I'm not South Asian at all. But it's a really interesting experience to just see how moving through situations, especially when you might look a little racially ambiguous, and how that changes how people view you, and then how they treat you, like in different contexts is pretty fascinating. So when I was a kid, my friends and I used to joke around, and they'd have me, kind of joke around and be like, guess my ethnicity, because I'd get a different, you know, guess like pretty much every single time. Um, So it's a sense of, just not necessarily belonging to any one group. And while there's a great thing about belonging to a group, because it creates a sense of community, I also feel very lucky to, be able to see all these different things in a very, um, almost kind of like as an outside perspective. Um, and see how these different things work together, because of the fact that I'm many things. Um, and I really encourage, whatever your background is, there's something really empowering about learning about who your people are, who your family is and their stories and where you come from. Because I think in order to really fully understand yourself, you really need to understand, how you came to be, like who who were the people who came before you, and that can really carry you forward and give you a lot of confidence, because you're like, you understand completely who you are, not just as an individual, but you know within the greater cultural context of everyone who came before you and made you possible. So I think that's kind of a really exciting thing, I think, and I definitely think that people should make sure that you're learning about where you come from, because as I'm starting to do that more, um, and starting to kind of like think critically about all these different intersections of things, it's been, yeah, the term I guess would be empowering. And I feel very lucky to be able to live on the boundaries of so many things, the boundaries of race and gender and all these different things, because I think it's allowed me to have a certain sense of just being able to learn a lot, you know, being able to look at how things fit together. Um, yeah, so I guess the more you learn about yourself and the more you learn about where you come from and everything behind it, the more you can present yourself and with pride and an authentic way. And I think if you're comfortable with it, be a voice, um, of being authentically yourself. And I think that's the world needs more people who I think are proud of being authentically themselves. And part of that is learning more about yourself and what that means for you, um, especially in the context of promoting diversity. It's like there's many different kinds of diversity, and yeah, it's being proud of where you came from, and if not proud, just understanding, how you got to be there and what everything that makes up you, good or bad. Um, I think it's a really important thing. So we're gonna have a few more interviews coming out. I'm hoping to interview an individual from Zimbabwe soon, which is going to be really interesting, who works in lion conservation. Jennifer's just put out a bunch of interviews. One is on working dogs and conservation, and the other one is with a co-founder of a marine mammal NGO, which is super exciting. So I definitely suggest that you watch this. Um, Both of those videos are really great. So, and also, if you're interested in this kind of context and you're interested in our interview series, which is usually a short interview series with diverse scientists, talking about their work, or you're interested in kind of these one-shots or conversations around diversity in STEM, please do subscribe to us. If you subscribe, there's a little red button below the screen. If you subscribe, you'll be able to get basically alerts of new content, and we are getting a lot new content. So we started in September this year, and we already have about 25 videos up as of this recording, which is a lot. So we've really been working to try to put quality content out there, because we're passionate about the fact that these issues are being talked about. But if we can continue to discuss them and get them out there, I think the more dialogue we have about these things, the better off our fields are going to be, and the more welcomed diverse people are going to feel. So it's all about opening up that dialogue and keeping it keeping it active as well. So we do attempt to put a video out a week. Sometimes, around the holidays it might slow down, but we're going to be keeping this up for quite a while. So definitely keep following us. And if you're interested in getting in touch with me, I'm going to put my email down kind of in drop, my Twitter handle down in the drop there. So I'm really active on Twitter. You can contact me there. Or drop me a line in the comments as well. And I'll be happy to get back to you, especially if you want to be interviewed or you have, something that you want to say, want to add to the conversation. So yeah, so thanks for listening, and we will see you soon. Bye now.